Well, international travellers have started to arrive back into Melbourne today as part of Victorian Government's revamped hotel quarantine program. As we go to air this evening, passengers on flights from Sri Lanka, Singapore, Qatar and the UAE have landed in Melbourne after the system was once again suspended following Victoria's third lockdown back in February. For more on this, I'm joined now from Melbourne by the Victorian Opposition Leader, Michael O'Brien. Michael, I want to be hopeful that all the lessons have been learnt and procedures remedied, but there's a lot of nervous Victorians tonight. We haven't got the vaccine rolled out as far as we'd like. There's been 3 lockdowns so far. This is, well, let's hope, third time lucky. How are you feeling about it?
Peter, I'm nervous like every single Victorian. We know when this government gets hotel quarantine wrong, they lock us up. And not just parts of Melbourne, they lock down the entire state. And everyone is nervous because the question on everyone's lips is, has this government learned from their stuff-ups in the past? The stuff-ups that led to 801 deaths, thousands of small businesses shut, many of whom have not reopened, kids kept out of school. The human consequences of the government getting it wrong are horrific. And we're now trying to take this government on trust that they've learned the mistakes of last time. I'm not holding my breath, but I am crossing my fingers.
So what did you make of the story today in The Age? You know, one of the key recommendations of the Coate inquiry, that's last year's Board of Inquiry, was not to have workers moving across particular sites. But there's a story in The Age that doctors involved in hotel quarantine are, in fact, working second jobs in different facilities. That's got to be a worry.
Well, if you have people potentially exposed to return travellers working across different sites, it really heightens the risk of cross-infection. And cross-infection is how you get this virus out from hotel quarantine workers into the community. So the danger is that having had this Coate inquiry, and the one thing it did come up with, didn't get answers about who said no to ADF, but the one thing it did agree on is that you must not have hotel quarantine workers working across sites. And today's report indicates the government hasn't even learnt that lesson, that those mistakes are still being made. Now, if that's the case, how can Victorians trust the government to get it right with the reopening of hotel quarantine today?
Look, and we also, you know, back in February, there was the issue of the bloke with the nebuliser. He turned up, he says he declared it. There was some debate, he didn't, but the Premier absolutely blamed him for the February lockdown. We think we've got a grab of the Premier, but also the person in charge of quarantine, Emma Cassar, was meant to undertake an inquiry. What went wrong and what need fixing? That's not clear that the details are known to the public. Let's have a listen.
I can categorically say that there is no evidence from our audits that he has raised this with our health team or our operational team.
He claims he was given permission to use it.
Well, again, that's not our recollection, and that's not our, from what we've heard, and the stories that, the information that we had from our health providers, there is no evidence for that.
Those machines are not allowed. That was clearly communicated.
So we've got issues with Coate recommendations. We've got the one we just talked about. We've obviously got issues where Coate recommended it would be back in the control of the police like in other jurisdictions. It's not so in Victoria, and we still haven't got to the bottom of what went wrong in February.
No, and I think the fact that the government tried to throw that poor man under a bus, a man who had a pre-existing medical condition, who had medical equipment to deal with that condition, and whose evidence was so credible. He didn't just say, yes, I declared it. He said, yes, I told them I declared it. And he said, look, and all they said to me was, well, let us know when you have used it because we need an hour's space before we can enter your room. That sounds credible. It sounds sensible. So for the government to turn around and say he didn't declare it, it was all his fault, it just shows you can't really trust this government. And again, what worries me is not just the government's incompetence, but it's the cost that Victorians have to pay when the government gets it wrong, because we know when they stuff up in hotel quarantine, they lock us down. We saw the entire state of Victoria locked down for 5 days on the verge of Valentine's Day. It cost thousands and thousands of businesses one of the busiest weekends of trade they have all year, took kids out of school. We cannot afford to get it wrong again. We must keep Victoria open.
There's a lot of people saying to me that if they get it wrong this time, if there is another lockdown, Victoria's 4th lockdown, then they really have to say 3 strikes, you're out. It's got to go to Gladys Berejiklian, let's say, and pay Victorians to come home via Sydney. In addition to 800 going up to 1,000 per week under reopened hotel quarantine, there's a plan for universities in Victoria to also bring in people, about 1,000 a week or every 2 weeks. What do you make of that plan?
Well, Peter, I wouldn't want to see overseas university students taking the place of Victorians who need to come home. But if the universities are prepared to pay for it with those students, and if our hotel quarantine system works and is up to it, then I think that would be a good thing, because those overseas students, they spend money in cafes, they spend money in bakeries, they rent apartments from mum and dad investors. So they are actually important for our economy, because education is Victoria's biggest export market. But it can't be at the expense of Victorians, and it certainly shouldn't be at the expense of risk to hotel quarantine.
There's another very disturbing story out in the media today. It relates to pretty horrific, vile child pornography. It involves a bloke called David O'Halloran, who used to work or head up a big charity here. The charity is called RecLink, and he's been sentenced to 9 months jail. I'm surprised it's 9 months jail. Victorians today are outraged that it's 9 months of jail. He is currently appealing this sentence in the Melbourne Magistrates Court. He's out on bail. How does someone involving child pornography, the abuse of a young girl, we're told, intellectually disabled, sex with an underage transgender schoolgirl, also this man involved in those acts and sharing that online, end up with a 9-month jail sentence?
Peter, speaking as a parent, this sort of thing just sickens me. It's horrific. You and I, we're both lawyers, or we were lawyers. We know in Victoria we don't have a justice system, we have a legal system. And this is an example of how the legal system doesn't deliver justice. This man didn't just swap horrible images and horrible videos. He actually created them. He made them himself, and he abused kids in the process. And to think that this bloke is not only getting off with a 9-month sentence, but he's now appealing it as being too harsh, it just tells you that this current government has got no interest in toughening up our legal system and protecting kids, which is the first job of any government.
This is every parent's nightmare, Michael O'Brien.
Horrific. You can't imagine anything worse. You wouldn't wish it on any child. And the fact that the legal system is not protecting these kids, it seems to be more interested in letting perpetrators off with a slap on the wrist. You shake your head, and the government should be hanging its head in shame.
Any word when the Premier will be back on deck?
Nothing yet. He's recuperating. Look, I do genuinely wish him well in recuperation. We play politics hard, but you don't have to do it at the personal level. But we do need to see this government delivering. They're not at the moment. I think Labor's been a bit of a one-man band for quite some time. And I think without Andrews being there, the government's been all at sea. And that's not good for Victoria, that got hit so hard by the lockdowns and desperately needs to recover and build back to where we need to be.